Hi, everybody. Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. I'm here with Donna, and we're going to be talking about podcasts. We're going to be talking about internet radio, all of those things. Donna, where can people find you?
They can find me at influenceradio.network is a great place to find me, or Donna at donnakunde.com if you want to send a direct email.
And you're also pretty active on LinkedIn as well, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
So that was internet. Give us the internet radio call sign again.
Influenceradio.network is the URL. You can land there and learn all about influenceradio.network. That's my company. Donna at donnakunde.com is my direct email. And then you can also find me on LinkedIn. Send me a direct message, Donna Kunde.
So Donna, you do a lot of work with podcasts and things like that. How did you get into this?
Funny you should ask. I started with a vision board in a coaching class. And when I finished it, I saw this row of microphones and I said, oh, I'm going to do a podcast. I laughed because I was like, I don't want to do a podcast. I had been very silent for most of my life. I starred in my own silent film for most of my life. Be seen, but be seen and not heard, a lot of toxic relationships. And when I saw those microphones, I decided to say yes to it, which, long story short, led to a local radio show. And at the end of 2019, when the radio station was sold, the person that I was doing the radio show with said, hey, let's start our own radio station. And so we gave birth to the International Business Growth Radio Network in 2020, right when COVID hit. And I was helping get our show host ready to do a radio show because I have a background as a musician.
And you used to play the piccolo, didn't you?
Yeah, still do sometimes. So that's how I got into it. It was just saying yes to this row of microphones on a vision board. And every step of the way thinking, oh, I've arrived. I'm a podcaster. Oh, I've arrived. I'm a radio show host. Oh, I've arrived. I'm a radio station owner. Oh, I've arrived. I'm a podcast coach. I don't think we're done yet. I think it's still going to be growing. But that's really how I got into it. I just started saying yes to microphones.
And one of the things I've seen a lot on LinkedIn, certainly in the last 6 months, is we're going to do a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like everybody's doing a podcast. So first and foremost, why should somebody do a podcast? I know I'm biased, but why should somebody do one?
Yeah, as I told you before we went live, my friend Bruce Chamoff, shout out over at the World Podcast Network, says that everyone's a podcaster. Some of us use microphones. And why should you do a podcast? Because it's a way for someone to hear your voice, hear your message. For centuries, we've been telling stories around a campfire, and that's human connection with the sound of a voice is one of the best ways to have that done. So I think that's one of the best reasons to have a podcast.
Well, so if you, there's a fact that's bandied around, and I think it's the case that on Spotify, that most podcasts get to 8 episodes and then they give up. I think it's like, is it 80% of podcasts on Spotify only get up to 8 episodes or something? So why do you think that is?
I think it's because the podcaster doesn't think through the content in advance. When I work with one of my hosts, we map out an entire season of 13 weeks. We do a business quarter. And in those 13 weeks, there is a roadmap that will take a listener on a journey from here to there. I love having this journey because then they're on the edge of the seat. Like, what's next? What's next? What do I do next? And what's a little bit different, Tim, that I do is we create a radio show that becomes the podcast just with the click of a button. And so in that hour of a radio show, I'm having my host create 4 segments, which each becomes a podcast episode with one topic. And then at the end of 13 weeks, they have 52 podcasts, which then can be dripped out over a year. If you do release one new podcast a week, you're having a whole year's worth of content to get past that 8. But I think it's really because they don't think about they don't know it's possible to think in advance of what you're going to say over the entire season, or even to have a season on a podcast.
I mean, I've seen some pretty terrible podcasts, because in effect, what people think a podcast is that I'm going to basically come on here and read out my brochure, and you're going to go, wow, and ring me up and buy stuff. And of course, it's not like that. I mean, you know, we're constantly having internal meetings about our podcasts, and we always say at the beginning, the most important thing about the podcast is the audience.
Yeah.
You know, if it's not about me, it's not about you, it's actually about the audience. Second is you, and the last thing is me. Whereas I think a lot of people think it's about me. The host is the most important thing, and I'm not.
No, what I tell my host is, you want to position yourself as the mentor in the hero's journey, that the listener is always the hero.
Yes.
Right. And you have a way, a methodology, you have something to share with your audience, with the world. You want to amplify it. You want to help people. You want to be seen as the solution, as I like to say. Well, if you're being seen as the solution, it's not all about you. It's about the other person and how you can show up to help them along. It's the Yoda to their Luke Skywalker. So I think that's a big thing, is just turning that switch a little bit about how you show up behind the microphone. It's not about you. It's about how you help others.
Yes, and I think we saw one podcast by Gartner, and the whole thing was scripted, and it was awful, because it was one of those ones where, you know, people were going like, I haven't got the words. What do I say next? What do I say next?
Oh no!
And it was like, and it was just. So I actually wrote a script, and we actually did one. You know, we do the digital, as you know, we do the digital download on a Friday. You've been on that show, and we actually did a script of an awful scripted podcast, and we thought it was really funny anyway.
Oh goodness, yeah, and you know, to script or not to script, and I say yes. You want to have some kind of an outline so that you don't meander down rabbit hole after rabbit hole. We talk about, in my world, be seen, be heard, be easy to follow, so that you're positioned as the solution. And in that being seen, it's how do they find you? So with your podcast, with your LinkedIn bio, all the things, positioning yourself as that mentor, as the solution. And then being heard is where you're creating your podcast. And as you're doing that, I say the easiest way to create a podcast is to actually follow a 6-step framework, which is becoming your show notes. So you have your title. Why is this important? What do they need to know? What do they need to do? And then how do they? Yes. And so there's a framework that you follow, which becomes your show notes and other content. But it's important to have thought things through. Going back to your reason, why don't many podcasters get past 8 episodes? It's because it's not thought through. It's like, oh, I should do something today. Let me turn on the microphone. What are you going to say? How are you going to get there? Versus spending a little bit of time in the thought process to be heard, and then positioning yourself in a way to be easy to follow, so that they can let you know, I'm here. I want to have a conversation with you. I want to work with you. I want to move forward with you. So,
but I mean, if you look at something like LinkedIn, or you know, let's take, you know, TikTok has kind of taken it over as well. You know, there's people on there that are getting out of cars who have no necessarily that any qualification, and they're just talking to a microphone. You know, I'm having a really bad day today, and da, 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 da. But they can get hundreds of thousands of followers. But I think. But I think they're the exception rather than the rule, aren't they?
Yeah, there's something about what they're saying, and probably more about the authenticity of how they're saying it, that resonates with the people that is catching on to that. So it's an underlying theme or message that is identifiable and relatable. When I work with hosts and they're creating a radio show that becomes a podcast, I say keep it live, as if it were live. Like, we're gonna run a recording. We're gonna syndicate you right away on a radio station. It's going to be recorded, but I don't want it highly edited. I want you to be relatable. If you have a couple of ums and ahs or some blooper reel in there, that makes for good radio. That makes for good connection. And most importantly, that makes for good authenticity and relatability. That's what it is about. It's not being perfect, but it's being really good at what you do and connecting with another human.
Yes, and I think the authenticity is so important. You talk about, I mean, I love what you say about being seen, be heard, and be easy to follow.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what I do, I always interview my guests beforehand. You know this because and I always have a system in the way I create my notes.
Mm-hmm.
So I know the way I'm going to. So it's not scripted. I always say to people, it's not scripted. It's structured.
Yes. Yeah, framework, something.
Yeah, so I know on my page, and I know what time, I look up and I say I've got another 9 minutes left. So what am I going to talk through? I'm going to miss that bit out. Okay, but I think that bit's really important.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, so going back to the, be seen, be heard, be easy to follow. I think it's a really good mantra for people, especially if they're getting into social, like for a first time. About be seen, because if you're not being seen, you're invisible.
Right. How do they find you?
Yeah. And be heard, and be easy to follow. And I think a podcast is such a great way of allowing people to connect. I interview you. This is nothing to do with my business.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm doing is, and as I said to you before you come on, I think that you have something really interesting to share, because I think it's really important that people see that why that they should actually run a podcast. I think there should be more of it.
Thank you. And before we move away from be seen, be heard, be easy to follow, it's answering those 3 questions. How do they find you? How do they get to know you through your content? That's the be heard. And then how do they let you know that they want to work with you? How do they connect with you? But I chose the words be seen. I chose that be word, being who we are, because what I find when I'm presenting this to people on a deep dive is there's usually one part of that, at least one part that people will sit back on. Like, do I really want to be seen? Do I really want to be heard? Do I really want to have this happen? And usually the answer is yes, but there's also some kind of a becoming that has to happen. I need to become the person who can be seen. I need to become the person who can be heard. Like there's some inner work. Everything that we do, this is based on the book Influencers Formula that I co-wrote with Ben Joya, book coach. And we do a lot of this inner work because why don't people go past 8 episodes? Well, some of it could be this inner work of, oh my gosh, this is a little difficult to put myself out there and be vulnerable. What's that?
And nobody's listening.
Yeah. Well, they listen eventually. There's that marketing ways to do that. One of the things that we like to say is create the radio station first. So you're tapping into the millions of listeners that are already out there tuning into the radio station, and then they can find you and begin to connect with you personally, one-to-one, following your podcast and subscribing and getting to know you more in that direction.
Because one of the things that I didn't understand until I met you was that the podcast. So I think I'm going backwards in terms of your steps, but for me it's logical, which is the podcast. So this is going to be syndicated on your radio show. So we're going to take this podcast and we're going to syndicate that on your internet radio show, and then your internet radio show is syndicated on the TuneIn app.
Right. Yeah. My station.
Correct me if I'm wrong. That has like 30 million people listening to it.
Yeah, 200 platforms, all of that.
Yeah, and other platforms as well. Now, the thing is you, as you said to me, you can't take a podcast and put it on TuneIn. They only take radio shows. So the only way that you can get your podcast on TuneIn is by being on a radio show.
Almost right. TuneIn does have a podcast. TuneIn does have a podcast platform. So yes to that. But if you want to be on the TuneIn when people get into their car and turn on the radio and they're tapping into TuneIn radio or on all of the, Hey Siri, Sirius or Alexa, whatever, all of those things. That's the TuneIn. That's the TuneIn radio piece, and you can't just do that with a podcast. You have to be part of a radio station for that one. And so the beauty of TuneIn and radio.net and some of the others that are, if you've ever been in a car, you had mentioned going on your vacation, on your holiday, and you were able
We're
to
in
tune
Canada,
in.
yeah.
Yeah, and in the car, there it is, right there. And so
You don't get radios in cars anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we had a hire car, brand new hire car. And where's the radio? There isn't one.
Mm-hmm.
My partner has a 20-year-old Saab. It's got a cassette player in it.
Mm-hmm.
But you get into a new car and there's nothing there. It was funny because a 32-year-old son gets in and said, "Where's the radio?" So you don't get radios in cars now.
Yeah.
Are you old?
Yeah. So that's the beauty of syndicating. Not only the positioning to be able to go back into your network, into your audience, and say, "Hey, I've been syndicated on a radio station now. I'm a global radio authority, heard in 125 plus countries. All of these things, and I'm syndicated on." Radio platforms, radio directories that I can't get on with a podcast. And you can listen to my show at, I don't know, Wednesday at 9 a.m. or Saturday at 8 p.m. You can set a clock to it to hear the next episode, right? It's very, for those people who like to set a time, a reminder instead of a round to it, then the radio is the way to go because they'll know exactly when to listen in again. So you're building that follower, and you're getting people who just like to have that variety show feel. So they'll tune into a station that they like and, listen to Tim Talks. Look, I like this one. I'm going to now add this to my playlist and want to go and research and connect further. So radio has all of these benefits that podcasting doesn't have. And what I tell people is once you've been syndicated on a radio station and you've got people setting their clock, then you can go back to everyone else and say, hey, if you missed it, now you're creating a little FOMO. If you missed the live show, you can catch it on demand on my playlist.
And I think it gives people, options because, you do have an option of YouTube or Spotify or things like that. But I think you've got another chance to get different people listening in.
Mm-hmm. And with your very first episode, you've got an audience, right? So when you create a podcast, a lot of the algorithms, if you're not uploading 3 or 4 initially, you're not getting in the algorithm. You're just not, okay. Right. Which is why I say do 4 right away. But with a radio station, you're tuning into their existing audience already. And just, that has a little something to it, I think. And what I hear from my hosts all the time is when they introduce themselves as they're giving a presentation or having a meeting and they say, yeah, I'm a radio show host. People are like, oh, it has a little magic to it. Right.
I've still not got used to introducing myself as a podcaster. I don't know what I've been running this since 2016 and I still don't introduce myself as a podcaster. I really should do.
Well, radio show host now.
Well, I'm a radio show. Well, I will be. I think it's nearly. I think they're coming when they're coming out next week or something, aren't they?
Yes, Saturday and Monday. So we have you on July the 6th, and then on July the 8th. We're going to be running your show at 11 a.m. Eastern time.
So I'm a podcaster and a radio show host.
International. Yep.
And I think it's so fascinating about the way that podcasting has developed, and I do hope that from today that people are going to think about more about podcasting as a mechanism to create content, because I think it's just such a great way of getting on talking rather than having to write stuff down, and I meet so many interesting people. And
I know we're coming to the end of time, but if I can throw one more thing out there,
yes,
Tim,
because I know you want to be on time.
Yeah, but this thing about the 80% advantage that Ben and I talk about in our book, The Influencer's Formula, And when you are structuring your podcast the way I suggested in a 13-week format where you're talking about episodes, you're taking the listener on a journey, when you do your podcast right, you're 80% done with the book. And if you want to be a little I or a big I influencer, and you say, I'm a podcaster, but then you add, I'm a radio show host, and finally you add, I'm an author, what does that do for your credibility? And what does that do for your impact to be able to reach more people? Some people like to listen to learn and consume. Some people like to read to consume. And so you're repurposing, you're leveraging, you're doing all these things. We call it the champagne glass pyramid. It's incredible what you can do when you've done a podcast, that all the things that can turn into. Don't just think I'm done with my podcast, because there's so many things, like a blog, like a book, like a radio show, like all these things that it can then be repurposed.
Donna, where can people find you?
They can find me at influenceradio.network. They can find me on LinkedIn, Donna Kunde, and they can find me in my inbox at donna@donnakunde.com.
And where can people find my radio show?
On influenceradio.network and on TuneIn. Just go to TuneIn and type in Influence Radio on the Saturday and Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time.
Thank you so much for coming on, Donna.